So hello, and yeah, my name is Óscar. I'm going to talk about the sort of comparative reflection about the Eurocommunism and what I just call Europopulism, just to refer to the current situation. So it's not a historical comparative analysis, but more or less thinking about the two different conjunctures with similar problems and maybe similar solutions and some differences. But I find also particularly interesting in this case is that there are at least like three main components. The first one is like the idea of crisis. In like both situations, there was a strong crisis, economic and political crisis. The second one is that the communist parties then they thought about how to create like a larger or more influential communist party, and maybe becoming a sort of a party in government. So it was a strong discussion about power and how to become not just marginalized political force. And the third one is the European issue, that it was how to think national politics in European context, but also in international context with some differences. So I think that these three issues and dilemmas are quite relevant because they are probably not solved, but we can just think about both coming back to history, but also thinking from the current situation. And I just use the idea of hegemony because Gramsci became quite popular in both cases, and also the Southern question also as a reference to Gramsci, but also because Eurocommunism and Europopulism was mainly developed in South European countries. So I would like to start with a couple of quotations from Pablo Iglesias, former leader of Podemos. And in both cases, he's talking about some of the most famous Eurocommunist leaders. The first one is the Italian communist leader, Enrico Berlinguer. So he's and he's, of course, he's talking about himself in this case, but he's not even the leader of the largest communist party in the West. Enrico Berlinguer was able to achieve what I have achieved, a Marxist government of the Atlantic Alliance. And that is despite the fact that he won the European elections, had talked to Corriere about the southern umbrella of NATO. From historical point of view, it makes me dizzy to witness what I have achieved. I mean, what it means Paulo says. And this was a comparative. The final quote is when Santiago Carrillo, the leader of the Spanish Communist Party, died. So he wrote this obituary about him, and this is about Carrillo. So nobody has ever carried the dignity of being General Secretary so successfully. After all, Santiago was one of ours. And there are like some interesting points here, of course, that Pablo Iglesias is talking about how much Podemos achieved in the last years, even more than Eurocommunism then, but also that he's referring to a big controversial left political leaders. Berlinguer, that he also highlights, Pablo Iglesias also highlights that he was more than a communist leader. He was like a national leader, and also like Santiago Carrillo, that he was also like considered sort of a social democratic reformist, and also even more controversial that he was one of the main figures in the Spanish transition from dictatorship to democracy. And Podemos is a party that emerged criticizing the transition, the Spanish transition from the dictatorship to democracy. So despite that, he can see that there is something relevant with these big figures and the way they have defined the left. So yes, it's sort of an overview. So there are like, of course, like different historical moments. So Eurocommunism was quite popular at the end of the 70s, the beginning of the 80s, and after that, yes, disappeared. And the Europopulism is like mainly as became stronger with Syriza, and after that with Podemos, and have like sort of like more undefined period after that. What is like also interesting from a geographical point of view is that that Eurocommunism was mainly like three countries, like Italy, France, and Spain, and partially also in Portugal. And populism was in Greece, Spain, France, a bit later, and also differently in Portugal. What is different is that the first period is the crisis of the communist parties. The second one is more like the crisis of the radical left and how to redefine the radical left project. And in the Eurocommunist case, we talk more about the crisis of capitalism starting in 73. And now we talk more about the crisis of neoliberalism that is similar but not the same. But what we're trying to create, both of them, they are trying to create like sort of in-between space that is moving beyond the radical left, but not becoming social democratic parties. And that's one of the huge dilemmas, and both periods show how difficult it is just to move beyond this sort of dichotomy. What is different in terms of international context, of course, is the idea of internationalism. Internationalism in the 70s and the 80s is connected with the Soviet Union and this sort of solidarity between the real socialism, communist parties, and so on. So this is a different type of internationalism. So when Eurocommunism opposed to the Soviet Union, so they tried to create a different type of international solidarity. How far they went, so not so far, but it was an attempt to do something different. And in the case of the populist movement, so this is more like a opposition to austerity politics that is creating a problem, because this opposition is within the European Union, with some parties that are quite skeptical against the European Union, others that are more in favor, and they want just to reform the European Union. So it creates a sort of different context. And the final question that is also like common for both is if there was like a moment just to think about a sort of regional left, regional communism or regional populism that was moving beyond the nation state, sorry. So how to imagine a different type of Europe that was produced and thought from a South European perspective in both cases. So this is going to be part of the discussion. This is it was like too long, but just to summarize some of the points of Eurocommunism. Actually, I was just became aware of that because I was just discussing populism in different fora, and I talked with some you have like different types of audiences. So I have once I have an older audience. So after the talks, I talked with some of them about Eurocommunism. They asked me what are the differences between Eurocommunism and populism and left populism. So that's a good question, and when I went back to Spain, so I have some Eurocommunist books from my family. So maybe it's a good idea just start to compare both and to see how the differences and similarities are between both. But again, this is mainly three parties, European parties that were thinking about the idea of Eurocommunism. Eurocommunism, the same as populism, is not something that was formulated by the parties. It was sort of critique from mass media against the parties. So they call Eurocommunists as something negative. Although later some of them they appropriate the use of the word. And the most important thing here is that they were trying to create a different left away from the influence of the Soviet Union. And it was a strong discussion against the traditional communist parties. And the communist parties and other left parties, they consider them reformist and almost like social democratic parties. And they create this sort of the dichotomy between revolution and reform and everything from all the good left discussions. So there is also something interesting with the idea of Eurocommunism, that it was not a European phenomenon. It was like Southern European phenomenon. It was later applied to some Nordic countries, even was also Japanese Eurocommunist party, but if that's possible. But the influence of Eurocommunism was also moved to some Eastern European countries. But it was mainly because it was in opposition to the Soviet Union and the idea of traditional communism. So it was this kind of critique and how the left could position itself within the European map. So it was like an ongoing European integration process. So how you can just defend more autonomous, independent left in a European context, and try just to put some distance and critique from the Soviet project. So despite all the Euro thing, the Southern commonality, so all these parties, they were not like working together, moving to what you mentioned before, transnational dimension. They were just more having like sort of bilateral meetings and having some common manifesto, but a very weak understanding of an alternative Europe. So they were like just more moving at the nation state level, and was making more international was the opposition against the Soviet Union as a sort of international alternative. So when you're doing that and you will try to create like a new communist alternative or new left alternative, so how you conceptualize that, and that's why people have Gramsci, because you can also use him differently, and so you can be like a moderate left or radical left, or even a right person and use some of his concepts. So Gramsci became quite popular, particularly from this distinction between war of position and maneuver, in order to explain how you have to accept the framework of liberal democracies and then not being revolutionary, but try to implement a sort of gradually revolution or gradually left project. So the idea was just to position within the different countries and have like this sort of a strategy of becoming hegemonic. And as mentioned here, there is a lack of European common vision. So the idea of becoming hegemonic means that you become hegemonic in Italy because the Communist Party was big. So you win the election. Probably they are going to do something similar later in Spain. Why not in France? And when all these countries are becoming hegemonic in their country, so you can start to talk about more regional hegemony. But this is coming as a sort of consequence of the national hegemony. So the framework was quite constrained and limited to the nation, the national arena. And they face the dilemma between the rupture and accepting institutions. When you become part of liberal democracy, how far you can change or alter the existing institutions. And what it was different from other communist parties was like the importance of civil society. Also borrowing this idea from Gramsci, that civil society was an important component, and so civil society was changing a lot. And it was not only about class issues, there were like other issues that were important to integrate as part of the left strategy. So they tried to change also like the orientation of the left project. But all in all, the state was conceived like the main actor, both in political and economic sense. So in order to change also like the economic system, so you need just to win the elections, go through the institutional framework, and try to change capitalism. So as you can imagine, so there were a lot of criticism from the left. They say this is like the new social democracy, and some of the members of the party, Eurocommunist Party, they became members of the Social Democratic Party. So actually there is a tension here between both positions. So comparing with this, we move to the current situation with the Southern European populism, and here's the tweet of Pablo Iglesias that we can see that there are some similarities here, and at least some dilemmas that have been reproduced because probably they are not easy to solve from left perspective. And actually, I think that theoretically it's quite interesting that there was sort of the return of Gramsci. There was a lot of talk about Marx in 2007 and 2008 with the financial crisis, but Gramsci became very influential, and particularly through the work of Ernesto Laclau. So it's also a way of understanding Gramsci, and also a bit different is there was also like a crisis of what is the radical left, and also the anti-capitalist project, that it was like quite difficult to identify before you have like the communist bloc. So it was a clear alternative to capitalism, but the radical left faces a lot of difficulties just to promote an alternative imagination or vision to capitalism. but there is also a crisis of social democracy that is a bit different from the situation before, that the problem with the Eurocommunism was just how to compete with social democratic parties, but here there was some decline in social democratic parties, and social mobilizations became quite crucial. So it was not just only the importance of civil society, but also how to think or rethink the political parties and try to connect those parties with social mobilization. That actually is sort of funny, because the communist parties, they are quite vertical and hierarchical, and some of these populist parties, they became too very hierarchical and also personalized in the way of having like a strong leadership. And it's a combination between existing and new parties. So we can't say that some of the parties are coming from the communist parties. We can see something in some cases like Syriza, part of the French parties, but there are also like new parties that apparently come from a different tradition, although they have some commonalities with that. And in this sense, there are like at least like two moments of becoming European or try to Europeanize populism. And it was like the first moment with Syriza, when there was like this sort of a Syriza's inspiration just to create an alternative Europe. So if we win in Greece, so we can also win Europe. And also that's the idea with the tweet that is reproducing this sort of a nation-state hegemony. So we start in Greece, and after that, so we continue in Spain, and that's the way of changing the whole European economic system and the neoliberal hegemony. So state became still quite central in the populist strategy, and after Syriza, there is a sort of a strategic problem that Greece is excluded from all the left populist alternatives, because they are just refusing this alternative, or this project as an alternative. So they need just to construct something different that is not based on the Greece experience. So very briefly, because I guess that more speakers are going to talk about this, but something positive, there are at least some forums in order just to think about the Europeanization of populism and how to move beyond the nation state. And some of these parties, they move both sides. They try to strengthen the national position, but also try to be part of this forum. So there is like at least like the plan B and the N25. And the first one is like more like probably you will say like an internationalist project. The second one is more a transnational one. And the first one is still maintaining the importance of the nation state as the key, and how you articulate different solidarities that are respecting the sovereignty of the people. And the second one is more like transnational, but actually has sort of weakness at the national level, because it is not rooted in some national infrastructures. So they try to move to the transnational, supranational dimension, and to put in value the local dimension. But in this articulation, they have some problems to create a multi-scalar policies that is connecting the local with the national and with the transnational. So it's more like the local transnational connection. And the plan B that is also like was also tried to incorporate civil society as part of the fora and the discussion. So they face also like this problem of becoming more and more institutionalized. And at the end, it was like more a discussion between the parties, the left-wing parties, and with a strong influence from the more Eurosceptical parties that become more dominant, like the Nordic countries or Mélenchon, from the French parties. Wow, and this is just a sort of it's like open question. So it's like looking at what is going on now. So when we had like the Syriza, it's just moving to a new type of social democracy, or coming back to a new type of social democracy. And when we look at Podemos, that is an alliance with the left unity. So it's becoming like a sort of repetition of the Eurocommunist Party, that it became too fragmented, or it became like the new left unity, when you need just to have like different left parties together, but with poor electoral results. Or if there is something new now in France with the this new coalition, when we can see that the Social Democratic Party is becoming part of an alliance that is led by the left populist or changing left populist leader, like Mélenchon. So there are like some open questions just to think about the past and the future. What I think that it's clear is that that there are like two difficulties for left populism, and the first one is how to overcome like the traditional reformist issue about not becoming a new social democratic party, and how to maintain a sort of more radical challenging agenda. And the second one is how to overcome like the nation state as the only space for politics, and how to try to construct like European international imaginaries, but also policies and think beyond the state. So I think that that's it. Thank you.